This edition of Meet America. I'm Annie Griffin, your host, and this is a continuation of what is happening up here in eastern Washington to the forests. And, you know, we hear in America about what's happening in the rainforests down in South America and Indonesia and Asia. But what's happening here in America is equally devastating. I want to bring to your attention that one large tree sweats daily 100 gallons of water. And that perspires into the low atmosphere and creates cloud cover. Now, when you're taking away millions and millions of trees, you are taking away the ability for our Earth to make rainwater, and that is why we're having droughts all over the world, and that is why lakes are drying up all over the world, and that is why our weather is changing all over the world. We must preserve our forest. We must, each individual one of us, start using alternative building products and boycott forest industries that claim they are environmentally friendly, such as Hancock Forest Management here in eastern Washington, who claims on their website that they really care about the environment, but they are clear-cutting so massively that I myself, Annie Griffin, am so alarmed that I have to now report this devastation. Now, someone who is equally alarmed and is a landowner here in eastern Washington and wishes to remain anonymous has pointed out this is an area where a fire broke out. It's on state land, and it went up the hill, and you can see, if I can bring that closer to you, where it stopped. The state did a great job in stopping it, apparently. And then someone came in and they took all the burnt trees. You can see all the tree stumps, and there is no growth. There is no tree growth because he took all the stumpage, he took all these trees away, even though they were burnt. And as a result, I guess the shade factor or whatever, but it is not coming back. So we're showing this to show you that clear cutting it doesn't work, and we need to really stop it and do selective logging and keep the big trees. Now, if this area had big trees, those big trees wouldn't have burnt, but because of logging for years and years and years, the logging industry taking the big trees and then just planting all the same monocultural trees and the same age growth of trees, that's what creates our fire hazards. So anyway, thanks for watching. There's a correction here. This little piece here is private land, and it was logged by its owner after it was burnt. And so the person who's helping me to bring attention to this is showing me that this kind of taking of salvage logging does not allow for tree growth. Okay, so this person is saying that this fire happened about 2.5 years ago, and this person did not replant even though he said he was going to. And so you can see that there really isn't any kind of young tree growth happening. Not much is happening on this land. So, but however, in that area where it looks like there was some fire, you do see some green growth there because of the shade and the trees protecting the undergrowth and thus the young trees from too much dryness. And that's what these trees do. They perspire and they keep the forest moist and cool, and they keep, they take in the moisture underneath their leaves. They actually take in moisture as well. So not only are they sweating out through their leaves, but they actually take in moisture from the air through their leaves. That's the amazing thing about trees. So when you take that ability away, you create a desert. And that's what's happening to our great country. We're creating a desert. Okay, so up above here you can see Hancock's clear cut. Hancock bought a lot of the Boise Cascade land, and they just go up on these hillsides and they clear cut, which causes erosion and demoisturizes the surrounding forest. And right next to it is, this is state land, and you can see where the fire went through. And the person here that wanted to bring attention to all this is saying that he's walked through that area where the state came through and stopped the fire, and because they left those trees standing even though they're dead because of the burned factor, they there's green growth and there's life. There's life happening again. And I guess that's the point he wants to bring forth, is that we're really supposed to leave after a fire. We really shouldn't be cutting down all the dead stumpage. We should be leaving some for shade growth and for animals and wildlife, and it comes back quicker that way. So there we have it, folks. Okay, right here we're now on state land where the fire went through, and if you can see, this is a large tree, and the fire started, but that was as far as it went because this was a big tree. And that's the example we're trying to give here, that the big trees just don't burn. There is another example. They just don't burn like the little ones. And that's why it's so important that we keep the large trees intact in any forest. And also they perspire more, they sweat more than small trees. And so they give us the rainfall. The person who's taking me through the state land forest, he says that about 3 or 4 days after the forest fire ended, he walked through here and he noticed about 15 woodpeckers came through and were eating all the bugs. So we need to have more woodpeckers and less pesticide spraying. That's what we need to harbor, and to facilitate. So here's another example, folks, of these large trees not burning and still being alive in this forest. And you'll notice that the smaller trees are dead. A lot of them are dead because they just couldn't survive in the fire. And so that's another reason and lesson why it's so important that we keep the large trees. Here's an example right here of a large tree that didn't burn. And there's several of these examples throughout this forest. And then you see all the little small spindly ones, and they're all dead. So that's why we really do need to protect the large trees. And they're coming down in eastern Washington so fast. These companies are so greedy and they just want the big trees. And you see these logging companies with their big logging trucks, and I'm seeing enormous 300- and 400-year-old trees that are cut down. And yet at the same time they're talking about fire danger and all that. So it's all, oh, we care about fire danger, but let's cut everything down, then we won't have any fire left. Just, that's what Trump says. If California would allow people to clear cut, we wouldn't have the fire danger, and it's just the opposite. You clear cut, and then you lose the perspiration, the sweating of the trees, and you lose the moisture, and you lose the cloud cover, and you lose the rainfall. Trees create rainfall. So we're gonna...
So here's an example of a tree that really burnt pretty bad.
Yeah.
But you look, it's still alive.
Yeah. Wow. Yes, exactly. Amazing. So true. Both of them. Fire is a very, very important part of nature, folks. And if you keep the big trees up, you're going to save a lot of majority of the forest.
But
And,
yeah.
yeah. We're looking at the ground cover. The grasses are coming back because they didn't have a lot of impact machinery here. And as a result, that's creating moisture for the soil, because these, grasses also perspire or sweat, we'll put it that way, and they help keep the moisture retained in the soil, and they stop the erosion. So here's another lesson, folks. You're seeing it for yourself, contrary to timber science, which tries to tell you differently. You're seeing it for yourself. Here's another example of how the fire came in and took all these little trees. So these companies that come in, and this is state land, so this is not a good example, but what they do is they clear cut, then they spray with herbicides to keep down all the green growth, which in fact actually enables young trees to grow. And then they plant their monocultural, genetically engineered trees that are meant to grow faster. And they're all the same age group, so they create their own fire hazard because they all burn like tinder. It's like when you're building a fire, you start with paper, and then you put little twigs, and then you finally put bigger twigs, and then you put the logs up. Well, when you have just a huge log in the fire and some paper, it's not going to ignite. But when you have tinder, it is. So here's a classic example of monocultural trees. Not that these were planted by the state, but same age growth trees, and you can see that they all got burnt. And where the big trees are, they've literally helped save the forest. So this is the parcel we were looking at, the road, the private land that the owner clear cut after the fire, and you can see the difference between the state land, leaving everything standing, and the growth underneath and the shade that the small trees require. And then you see the kind of prairie land as opposed to what used to be a forest. So nature knows best, folks, And then if you look in the distance there, that looks like a piece of Hancock land there.
This is private.
Yeah, is that private?
Yeah.
But it's not Hancock? Okay. But still, that's a private owner that, clear cuts on a steep slope. And so what that does is it causes erosion and runoff, and it's devastating. And this is just what's happening all over. Landowners are just selling off their forests to pay off their bills. And they're not doing it in a sustainable way. So we've got to help them in whatever way we can. And one of those ways is to build with alternative building products and start trust funds for these landowners that want to keep their forest intact. In this little forest, here's tree growth. These are young little trees, and they're all over the place. They're just sprouting up. And that's because they have the moisture content, and the soil has not been disrupted. And they're getting the coolness of this forest, even though most of it's burnt, to continue their cycle. So the person who's walking me through this forest, that wishes to remain anonymous, says that he came here 2.5 years ago after the fire, and this was all ash. And then the needles of the living trees sparkled down and drifted down, and they caused a ground cover, and that retained some moisture in the soil, and then you see all this wonderful growth coming in after that. So that's how it works. Here's another classic example of a real charred piece of tree, and then you see the growth. It survived it. And there is a classic example of a beetle. You see that sap, that's usually a bark beetle, and bark beetles are very much part of culling overgrowth of forest naturally, and they attack the weaker trees. And the weaker trees don't have the sap to kill the bark beetle as it burrows into the bark. And so that's how the bark beetle kills the trees. There's an example of the woodpecker. They can hear the ants and all the bugs inside the bark of the tree, and that's how they know how to peck and where to peck. So this is an example of more and more of the clear cuts. Those are clear cuts probably from 25, 30 years ago. Maybe more recently, that more bald spot. But Eastern Washington is being taken real advantage of by these big timber companies like Hancock, Forest Management, that just come and clear cut because they can, because people don't speak out, and private owners. Private owners own something like 2 million plus acres of land here in Stevens County, and the Colville Forest is 1 million something. So the private owners can really, really denude the forest here, and there's just no restriction, no protection. They all refer to the state's Forest Practices Act, but that allows for these timber companies to come and leave a buffer zone of 3 trees and say that that's safe. And the trees are the ones that when the rain falls, it falls on the leaves evaporate the water, and then the rest falls on the ground, and then the roots take up that water. So when you don't have any trees, you are allowing all that water just to saturate into mud on these slopes, and then that's what causes things like the Oso mudslide and just the deterioration of our streams and our rivers that feed our lakes. And this is happening all over the world, and that's why lakes are drying up and our rainfall is drying up. So it's so important that if you're a private landowner, to protect your forest and really make sure that the timber company that you're going to allow to log your land is doing it sustainably and leaving the big trees. And I say, do not believe what Hancock is telling you on its website, because I'm showing you the truth. I'm coming out here to their areas, and I don't know if this particular piece is Hancock or not, but it looks like something that they would do. And you've seen other pieces where it has been them. Okay.
Well, my purpose here today is to take a look at an area that's going to be logged off by the Hancock Timber Company.
Okay.
And we're going to look at a before, and then we're going to try to do an after. And, it's the land that
It's right near
we
your
bought-
property, right?
Well, yeah, it borders our property, my property that we bought in the 1970s, and we were surrounded by state land and Boise Cascade land, so we thought, you know, we were in pretty good shape of not, you know, of having forest land surrounding. But now the logging technique that they're using is spraying and clear cutting really is doing a lot of damage to the wildlife and the bordering lands. So I'm
Yeah.
concerned about it.
And your private land in your springs, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
So
Right.
anyway, we'll go up on the side of the hill. That's Baldy, Old Baldy is
is-
the name of the mountain.
Is that a clear cut from Hancock, or do you know?
No, that's from the 1954 fire.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and there have been several fires on Baldy. And that's burned a couple times.
I see.
And it's had its name Baldy. It's always been Old Baldy for
Okay,
years. So
okay.
probably because it's burned several times.
Well, it probably has very thin soils, and so you don't
Yes.
get the reproduction that
Yeah.
you might if the soils
And it's
were
rocky
deeper.
and there's cliffs and everything. And they're not going to log. This is the part that they're not going to log. This part here, because there's no trees on that side hill. But
Right.
back on the back side that you can't really see from here is where they're going to destroy it. And I'm concerned about the one canyon. We'll see it better from up above. That they're going to clear cut on the top of that canyon, and we know what the erosion will do. And,
Yeah.
my neighbor has a cabin right down at the bottom of that canyon,
Wow.
and I'm a little concerned about that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Okay, very good.
so we're
That's-
going to
that's-
try to talk them into doing a selective cut, at least in certain areas.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, very good.
Okay.
All right, so we're looking at a clear cut that was done, I guess, a few years ago, Mike, and it
2
was
years,
with
2 years.
and that was Vaughan's, you say? Vaughan's?
But that's not real. Technically, that's not a clear cut.
It's technically not a clear cut, but
Well, it sure looks clear cut to me. I mean, it's bald.
Well,
Sure, there's a few trees,
well,
but on the top there, what do you think, Gloria? That's okay?
I would not call that a clear cut.
Okay.
And it's more of a.
Why don't you come here, because the camera can't hear you.
Okay.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah,
So, just
talk to the camera.
just looking at that, I have to look at that.
Sure, I understand.
But just looking at that from here, that would be what I would call a variable density thinning.
Uh-huh.
And variable density means that you can have some areas that are pretty open and others that have a lot more trees left in them. And but you know, just looking at it from a distance, you can't really make a firm judgment of why they did what they did. But I'm not seeing a lot of exposed soil.
I am at the top. I'm seeing a lot.
Well, that's whether that's exposed or not. If you were standing over there and looking back here, this grass would look exposed, and that's not exposed. That's grass. So
But this has a lot of trees around here. There's that whole bald spot. It looks like maybe 2 or 3 acres that's bald. I mean, I don't see a whole bunch of, sparse trees like you do here. I see lower down.
Lorna, it's not called a clear cut.
It's what?
It's not called a clear cut.
Right, I understand that, but it's still
And
bald.
But there are openings. It's
Right.
okay. It looks bald to you. Okay, that's not a forestry term, and it's not an accurate description of what
I
we're
understand,
looking at
but
from that.
I understand, and I understand what forestry terms try to dress things up as different
You know,
individual
Lorna,
classes.
Don't give me this shit.
No,
Okay.
Gloria, understand my perspective. That to me is not okay. Now, okay, so we're driving along, Mike, and you're saying this never recovered. From
well,
what?
it came back real thick, and then they left a lot of diseased trees, and okay, you can kind of start seeing here the boundary.
Where's the
And we're
boundary?
gonna go up on top too.
So where's the
I'll show you.
boundary between your land, you're saying, and
Yeah, we'll just start right here.
because I'm filming now. What the hell? I mean, I'm just missing all this good stuff, so I might as well just start filming.
Well, I'm just trying to get a point where you can see
Okay.
the difference in that 11 or 12 years.
So that's their land? Is that Hancock or what is
Yeah.
that? Okay.
And that was logged in 2007.
Come over here where I can where the camera
That
can
was
hear
logged
you.
in 2007, 2008.
Right.
You know, that winter. And
Okay.
was replanted. And so it's been almost 11, 12 years. And it, you know, before it was very similar to my property on the right. It was a forest, more of a forest. And
Oh, I see. That's your property on the right.
yeah, and that I've logged. That's all been logged, quite heavily. You know, more
You
than I.
you log that.
But I mean, it's at about the same time.
But you log it sustainably, so there's an
Well-
example of a sustainable logging
There you go.
as opposed to one that's just been taken pretty much out. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay. Well, that's a good example. So this is so important that people like you that are sustainably logging, what do you say about that, Gloria? Doesn't that look like, I mean, what a difference in the...
Well, absolutely. I mean, the just, you know, even if you know nothing at all about forestry, you can look at that and say, well, you know, which is the healthier side, which is a more natural forest, which is going to provide the best habitat.
Yeah.
And you know, there's some reproduction in there, but certainly it's not at this
Right.
the same pattern and density as the original
Right.
forest. And with climate change, things are drying out a lot more. The precipitation pattern is different.
Right.
And so you may not get much more than what you see right there coming back in, and there's going to be a lot of competition for the limited amount of water available, and the soils look particularly thin.
Yeah.
And so that would be that's kind of a one-trick pony. You
Well, yeah.
take off the trees off of that, and you won't be back there for 50, 60 years as a minimum, and then fortunately, I think a landowner would probably at that point say, well, it's not worth going back in for a commercial sale. But it's a pretty harsh way to treat the forest.
Yeah, really. Mike, good job. So there on the right is your property, and you as a sustainable logger. Tell me what you did in there, how you sustainably log. Do you take just some small trees or diseased trees, or how do you do that keeps this so
Well,
healthy looking?
It's really steep and they're very dangerous to be running a skidder. And
Yeah.
the logger that I hired, you know, you could kind of see the skid trails he had, but he'd start at the top and skid the logs down, and he got what he could get, and logged it a little heavier than I wanted it done. But as you can come on around and look on this edge, it looks a little better
Okay.
going that way.
Well, I think it looks great.
Well,
I mean, you got a lot of trees there. You didn't rape the land. You know, you didn't rape the land, Mike. Wouldn't you agree, Gloria? I mean, that looks really healthy and
It's, you know, the forest is very stressed. You know, I wouldn't. It's not something that I would call a healthy forest. Just again, from a distant observation, there's a lot of trees that are showing discoloration, and that's likely a combination of drought stress, root rot, and it's so for what, you know, for the forest at this day and age in that particular location, it's doing pretty darn well. But you know, again, we actually the majority of forests that we are looking at actually are not healthy, and that therein lies part of the problem. So,
Okay.
but you know, at least the way that section has been logged of Mike's, it gives the forest a fighting chance. You know, the ground temperatures alone, if you would lay a thermometer on the ground on the Hancock side versus on Mike's side, you would probably see anywhere from a 15 to 25 degree difference, if not more, particularly on a sunny day. that adds to the stress of the trees.
Wow. What a classic example, huh? Really, what a classic example of the difference in logging practices.
Well, there's much worse.
It was,
Yeah.
and it was very.
Okay, what are you saying?
If you're calling that a good example of reforestation, which they did, they planted that site fully, that is very poor survivability on what they planted, and you would call that a failed plantation.
And it's all monocultural trees, right, generally?
I can't tell from this distance. It looks like they probably put in primarily fir, but they may have added others that I'm not discerning from this distance on that edge. So I'm not at all surprised. And I also have ground
This
tinted
is
glasses, so
Mike's
I can
property
see.
that he logged, and so you can see all the trees are pretty much growing up, and at this time of year there is discoloration, but it's not like all your trees are dying.
Up in the Yak, where I was working, I had brown colored glasses, and the foresters were all
How much oxygen you're creating just by saving an acre of forest? One average tree creates 260 pounds of oxygen a year. So imagine just what that's creating for our world.
Yeah.
So private owners, you really give so much when you log sustainably like this, and with care for the world, with care for the trees. And it's important. Logging is very important to keep our forest healthy, but there's a way to do it, and you're doing it. Congratulations. Thank you. Okay, Mike, you want to explain? This is you were sitting on your property, yeah?
You want to look, that's the state logged that last year.
Oh, okay.
And, I wasn't very happy with the way they did it. And then Hancock is going to log to the south of that, a strip.
Okay.
And it'll look probably very similar to what the state did on the school section. That's state land. And then back behind, you can see the 12-year-old clear cut that's coming back.
Whose is that?
There are trees coming back,
Who's that?
but
Is that state?
that was that's Hancock.
That's Hancock.
Yeah, but it was forest.
12 years
capital.
ago, right? Okay, and it was forest capital. Okay. Yeah. So they just clear cut
And
that.
they left,
Did
and up on top pretty much. They left the bottom kind of a little better. So up
Yeah.
on top they pretty much creamed it.
Okay.
And
And that was 12 years ago, huh? So it's taken 12 years.
It will be 12. Yeah.
So you see, folks, how long it takes just to get little baby trees going. 12 years later. Now, Gloria, if they had left more trees, would there be better growth, or what's your opinion on that?
It depends. The aspect is different. We've got it looks more like an east aspect, and that's a cooler aspect. So you are getting some pretty good reproduction in there. Yeah, if you left it, if you just thinned it, you would have a lot less stress on the smaller trees and have a lot coming in.
There'd be more moisture, and not only that, like if a fire were to come through, it would just take all that young plantation tree out, because there's no big trees to...
Well, it would, if a fire came through, if it was hot enough, it would take everything out.
Right, but...
So, and, if the trees are tall enough to lead the fire up into the crown, it would take all the overstory off too.
Right, but I was just in in a forest where there was a fire and the big trees weren't taken out, but all the little trees were. So that's what I'm talking about.
And that's called a good fire.
That's exactly. So when you have enough of the big trees to protect a forest, you're not going to have as hot a fire as you are if you have a bunch of little trees and a few big trees, is what I'm saying.
If the understory is dry and you've got a fair amount of slash on the ground and it's dense understory, yes, it will carry a very hot flame that will get into the canopy and take everything out.
Yeah, but I just saw a witness where it was like that and it didn't take out the canopy. You can see that all around the trunks, it's black charred.
Was it in ponderosa pine?
And no, it was a forest that had many different kind of, fir and ponderosa pine. It had a mixture. It was Paul's place, and he was trying to show me the difference between, a fire that just burns through a forest. It was state land, and they hadn't cut it. Clear cut it. They had just selectively logged, and therefore they had left enough big trees that the younger trees just didn't create enough fire because there just wasn't enough of the small trees to create that. And when I was interviewing Julia Butterfly back in Humboldt County, we came across a view very similar to this. And a logger was trying to point out how important it was to log, and everything was burnt. But there was one green patch, about 5 acres, and I said, well, why didn't that burn? He said, oh, that's an old growth. They don't burn like the other trees do. So second growth does. So if they'd left, let's say 50% really old trees up in that area, is my point that I'm trying to point out to people, that probably wouldn't have burned as much as it's going to burn with those little trees right there.
Correct.
So I just wanted
Yes.
to...
The saying was that in the past that if you were waiting for the forest fires to go out, you were either waiting for rain or for it to hit old growth.
Yeah. Well, of course, look at Yellowstone. They haven't logged there, and there's a lot of big old growth that burned down because it became so hot because of the understory. They didn't let it burn year after year like the Indians used to do, so it grew in a hot enough understory that even the big trees burned.
Well, most of Yellowstone is in lodgepole pine habitat, and that is a habitat that burns regularly at very high severity fires and pretty much complete destruction because, well, what appears to be complete destruction to us, but that's how lodgepole pine forests regenerate.
Oh, I see.
Because they have serotinous cones.
Uh-huh.
Serotinous cones are cones that require a high heat to open and release the seeds. So the seeds don't typically open until they go through a fire. And usually it's a stand replacing fire because the size and density of the forest is fairly uniform. And so, yes, lodgepole pine is a fire-dependent ecosystem.
Ah, okay. And that I didn't know that. So Yellowstone is a lodgepole, basically.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. So what is this now? This is like deciduous, different varieties, fir and...
No, deciduous is a hardwood tree that has a leaf that loses its leaves
Okay.
in the winter.
Okay.
And a coniferous is a
Coniferous.
cone-bearing
Yeah,
as
okay.
opposed to deciduous. Now you will have larch, which is an anomaly in that it is a coniferous tree, but it loses its needles in the fall and regrows them each spring.
I
It's
see.
one of the only ones that does that.
So what is this forest comprised of, basically, would you say?
It looks like primarily Doug fir.
Doug fir?
But then when you're a little closer in here, you can see that there are a lot of different species. Ponderosa pine right below us. We came through lodgepole.
That is a recent clear cut there, that round one.
Yes.
That's Hancock.
Oh, is it? Okay, let's try to
And
get
I don't know where exactly. That's
Yeah.
Wellington Peak, that little peak there, because this is the Wellington Peak quadrangle here. I don't know why they named it that, but that's it.
Certainly not like most
And-
outstanding
Well,
landscape.
You know, a friend of mine was coming to visit by plane, and we were talking about how the forests were being cut down, and she doesn't believe what I'm saying, right? And so she was flying over Washington. And the first thing she said when she got off the plane, "You were right." And I said, "Right about what?" She said, "All the clear cuts I saw as I flew over Washington is amazing." She couldn't believe it. So that's what they're doing behind the scenes here. You're getting kind of a good picture of what's going on.
That one, the side of Colburn Hill, that's Colburn Mountain Hill, that was forest capital, I think it was 2005 or 2006. So it's been quite a while. And that still has not come back. And,
Yeah.
you know,
You're looking at Hancock
So
right
pretty-
there. That's a
pretty big.
Hancock
Yeah.
cut.
all these
That-
years.
So this represents rainfall, millions and millions of tons of rainfall a year that are being cut down. And oxygen and carbon intake. It's all being lost, folks. We have got to build with other products.
The large timber corporations take over is that they underbid on sales, particularly for the Forest Service, large sales. They'll come in from quite a distance and underbid the local companies who are asking for a fair price, you know, but not, I mean, fair, not like excessive, but a reasonable price. And the larger corporations will come in, and if they can underbid for 3 years in a row, they can basically drive that smaller mill out of business. The smaller mill will then have to sell for pennies on the dollar, and then the larger company takes over, and they are not nearly as invested in the community. You know, I'll take Vaughan's as an example, and that's exactly what Curtis Vaughan was saying this morning at our meeting, is that that is something they're very concerned about and would like the Small Business Administration to be involved so that these corporations can't come in and take up every sale, basically suck the supply out and then leave these smaller local mills, independent mills, dangling and then going out of business. And so the smaller mills have to be extremely innovative and work very hard to ensure that they are staying one step ahead of the corporations, the larger corporations. And Vaughan is a good example of that. And they are heavily invested in the community. They're great contributors to what happens in the community and you know, the civic side. And
Boise Cascade used to be
when they were smaller.
So Vaughan's is a small.
Yeah, it's considered small. They have 2 mills, one in Colville and one in Usk. I think they have some investments in other opportunities, but one of the interesting things they're doing now, which is very cutting edge, is one of the Vaughan, the son of the current president of Vaughan Brothers Lumber, is he's starting a CLT plant, a cross-laminated timber, and that's when you can use very small material, but you laminate it to create beams and posts so that you can actually build multi-story wooden structures.
Great.
And there's going to be an entire block in Spokane built of CLT and to show what can be done. And it's right now, from what we can see from the demand side, is that as soon as Russ Vaughan gets this plant built, he will probably have everything sold probably 2 years out. And so it's you know, it is very cutting edge, and it is a way to utilize the smaller materials, and it is a way to stay a step ahead of the corporations who are still really stuck in this old model. The state as well, you know, the state is you know, is driven by the imperative to generate funds for the schools.
that's a school section.
Yeah,
actually.
it's a school section. Yeah, I saw that on the map.
But
Section
can you
16.
believe what they did?
Yeah, I believe that they did that, and I know why they did that. It's maximized present net value, and it's not really a sustainable model. And so when we were when we were looking at other Hancock, you know, to use them as the example, that's really old-fashioned. It's really, it's not at all state-of-the-art. It's not at all
They're behind the times.
incorporating the current research and understanding of the ecological conditions that need to exist, and the outcomes that we need on these acreages. And it's, you know, it's not a secret. It's out there, and other companies are doing it. Agencies are doing it successfully, but you know, they're still caught up. And this is the way we used to do it. You know, I mean,
Change.
it took the Forest Service 30 years. You know, from when they knew what was the right way to do it to when they were actually starting to do it the right way.
Now, Gloria, would you mind explaining a little bit about what the Colville National Forest has been able to do and what you've been able to accomplish, your group, as far as getting more board feet by using sustainable logging practices? Can you explain that concept a little bit, how you're able to do that?
Yes, what you're talking about is the Northeast Washington Forestry Coalition, a collaborative that's been around since 2001. And it's a collection of people involved in the timber industry, the power industry, Avista, which has a biomass power plant in Kettle Falls, Washington. And we work with the Colville National Forest, which is actually a very small forest as far as land. I think it's about 1 million acres, 1.1. It's fairly small. But over the years, we've developed a very strong working relationship, and I also did not finish my thought on the members of the collaborative, members of industry, members from conservation organizations, people that have had experience in public land management agencies. And we've all come together with the objective of celebrating the abundance that we have on the Colville National Forest, but celebrating it in a way that sustains it for present and future generations. And so we have developed a set of guidelines that are amenable to both the timber industry and conservationists, and we apply those in unique ways across the landscape, primarily with the, well, not primarily, with the focus of forest restoration and creating greater resilience in the face of wildfire, drought, floods, all those perturbations that happen to forests. We're looking to help these forests be healthier, be more resilient, and particularly when you add climate change to that mix, when we have hotter, drier conditions, and we also are facing the consequences of over 100 years of fire suppression, which is a very bad idea. Fires are a very important part of forests. It's part of their history, and they actually need it to survive and thrive over the centuries. It's difficult to say that when we know that some people will lose their property or their homes. That's very, very difficult and painful, but we have to figure out how to reintegrate fire back into the management scheme and back into these landscapes. And nature is helping us by absolutely putting the gas pedal to the floor on wildfires, and we can see that chickens are coming home to roost, both with climate change and fire suppression. So our goal as a collaborative, and the goal of the Forest Service, the goal of DNR, the state lands, they are on board, and we are looking at ways that we can improve the health of forests in eastern Washington, but do them in innovative ways. The meeting that we had this morning with Senator Cantwell was about how can, explaining to her and her staff what we are doing here as a collaborative, how we are involving the community, emphasizing recreation opportunities that are not on Forest Service land, but could be part of the larger picture. So what we're doing is something that the Forest Service actually attempted to start in 1992, called ecosystem management. And ecosystem management was stepping back and looking at a broader temporal and spatial scale on forest management to become more sustainable. So finally, as I said, it takes a long time to change the direction of a very large ocean liner, but it has changed, and we're demonstrating that on the Colville. One of the outcomes, we have treated a very high number of acres per year in terms of reducing the fire risk on them, and that's not through clear cutting, that's through intelligent thinning, trying to mimic nature, and then cleaning up the understory, not so much so that we're removing the vital nutrients, but so that we're creating an opportunity for the trees that are there to thrive.
So how do you do that mechanically? Just come in?
Yeah,
certain areas?
there's all different ways. We employ everything from mechanical tree removal to prescribed fire and everything in between. You know? So, and this year, and it's somewhat of an anomaly, and it's not something that we're going to have every year, but this year, the Colville National Forest, at just over 1 million acres, is producing the most board feet of any national forest in the United States.
And that's through small trees?
Yes, it's
And leaving the large?
one of our guidelines, which is accepted and followed by the Forest Service, is we do not cut anything over 21 inches diameter breast height. And that's a pretty good sized tree.
Yeah.
And we try to leave some of the smaller ones. Because we don't cut everything. We don't cut the aspen. We don't cut the other deciduous trees. They're an important part of the ecology of that site. And so we leave the big trees, and Vaughan's actually prefers that. You will actually have to pay a penalty if you bring a tree that is at the smallest dimension bigger than 12 inches. Because their equipment has been downsized to handle small diameter, and so they don't really want the big trees. So there is no incentive to cut the big trees, and that is great for everybody, and we're all happy about that. And it's great for the forest, it's great for those of us who want to see that old growth, and it's great for Vaughan's.
So introduce yourself one more time, because we're running out of time.
I'm Gloria Flora. I'm the Director of Sustainable Obtainable Solutions, a nonprofit focused on ensuring the sustainability of public lands. And I started that in 2001 after a 23-year career in the Forest Service.
Thank you, Gloria. And to the continuation of our last segment on the logging in Eastern Washington. And here you have an example. You just heard about Vaughan's from Gloria. And Vaughan's, in my opinion, that's a clear cut, that little bald spot there. But the difference between them and Hancock is Vaughan's at least is starting to mill smaller trees and making beams out of them. They're being innovative so they can save the big trees, so they can save our forests. Whereas Hancock is just clear cutting, and they're not taking that money and investing it in a way Vaughan's is. So I'm asking everyone, please buy from logging companies that are finding more practical and better ways to save our forests. And I can forgive Vaughan's for that little clear cut down there on that knoll, because they're investing their money in better forest practices, and that's what Hancock needs to do. And until they do that, if you don't buy from them, you're going to be doing your part, folks. Thanks for watching. Segment of so you can see for yourself Hancock's sustainable logging practices here in Eastern Washington. So when you go to buy wood, please ask, is this Vaughan's or is this Hancock?
Any other comments?
I came through when Forest Capital owned it. I bought my property 14 years ago, and I'm down on Limekiln Hill, north of Springdale, about 2.5 miles. And when Boise sold the contract to Forest Capital, the back of my property was the 1,400 acres that stretched from me to Springdale had been uncut for 30 years. So it actually was starting to grow back. We've got a creek that runs down Jepson Road that runs from East Jump Off Joe, that runs all the way down. It actually starts on the other side of the 395. The summer that I bought my property in September, Forest Capital came in and cut 39.5 acres directly above me. It's now called the Bald Knob because there's nothing that survived it. What they left back there, everything died. All the saplings, all the little firs, everything died. The topsoil has been washing into my property line since. In 2008, they came back and did it again, cut the next 39.5 acres. I guess it's 39.5 acres you don't have to replant. At least that's what I was told by loggers that were up there cutting it. They were local Springdale, and I actually know the guys that were doing it. And they said that it was going to get sold, and it got sold to Hancock. Hancock came back and cut it again. That's 3 times in 12 years. They cut the same piece of property. There's nothing alive up there. It's literally dust is blowing off the top of it. The rocks are coming back out. The topsoil, I don't know how much topsoil it's lost, but it's lost quite a bit in the last 14 years. A couple of statistics. According to the latest studies, Google Earth, we have cut, as a species, we have cut half the world's forests down in the last 9,000 years. Half of it. Half of it's gone. We've got, we're all enjoying the weather and the smoke and everything else, I'm sure, but the latest figures from the observatory in Hawaii is saying that we are now sitting at 410 parts per million CO2 in the atmosphere. That's from our addiction to fossil fuels. We know this. Trees mitigate what we're doing. We're a fossil fuel civilization. There's been 22 civilizations that have come up on this planet, chronicled by anthropologists. We're number 23. All 22 of previous civilizations have collapsed due to one reason: deforestation, loss of ecological viability. Most of them, we've got nothing but ruins. The Mayans, the Romans, everybody chopped everything down. They used up all their water. They used up all the topsoil growing, and suddenly civilizations just can't do it. We now have what they're calling climate change. That's really a misnomer term. We change babies' diapers, we change our tires. We're changing the entire atmosphere of the planet to a state that we haven't seen in 2.2 to 5.5 million years ago. 410 parts per million hasn't been seen since the Pliocene era. That's 2.2 to 5.5 million years ago. They had forests in the Arctic, what we call the Arctic. There were boreal forests and alligators living up there. The forests that we have left, we shouldn't be cutting them down, we should be planting, because that's one of the few things that actually absorb CO2 out of the atmosphere. The oceans are full. The oceanographers are now saying the oceans are starting to release CO2 back into the atmosphere because they can't absorb anymore. 80% of the CO2 that we've released since the dawn of the industrial age 200 years ago has been absorbed by the ocean. They're now overstocked. We're losing, the oysters can't even grow shells out on the northwest Washington coast because the oceans are acidifying from the CO2.
I find your information enlightening, but in light of the fact that
That was the commissioners' meeting in Colville this summer, 2018. The commissioners there, the Tri-County commissioners, have been working with the Colville National Forest, and that is now an exemplary forest. It produces more board feet than any other federal forest, but they do not cut down the big trees, and they are using sustainable logging practices. Thanks for watching Meet America.
Covered with